So after the last few weeks hearing arguments from right-wing plants pretending to be far left and concerned about Gaza, along with people on the far left who fall for their propaganda, I figure I need to make one more video on voting, countering the really bad arguments I've seen online against voting. This is going to have to be quick because the last day to register for voting in many swing states is Monday, so I won't be using the usual image transitions. Plus, I'm pretty exhausted from the Solarpunk channel and plan to take a week-long break from it after this. You read the title right, and it's not hyperbole. Leftists who refuse to vote for Harris this year because of Gaza will be the first on the semi-trucks, trains are gay, and they sound too close to trans, to the camps for the crime of anti-Semitism if Trump gets elected. Democrats at this point are the only reason why you still have free speech and can spread leftist thinking uninhibited. Under Trump, none of us will have that, and yes, prison camps are totally one of the possibilities if democracy ceases to function. There is historical and legal precedence as the US created and perfected the first concentration camps, first for the Trail of Tears, then with the Japanese internment camps, and most recently with child separation at the border. The rabid right-wing Supreme Court just has to pull out some shot-down precedent as legit, like the argument used to destroy Roe, literally citing the case of a witch trial judge. There is a lot wrong with liberal democracies, but because you can only see the awful, it appears to make you completely blind to the few good things that is guaranteed. Classical liberalism is awful to the planet, the global south, and minorities especially. Fascism, on the other hand, is a nightmare for everyone and will destroy the planet, and they were able to memory hole leftist thought in the US for 50 years. Believe it, they can do that again. In the 1920s for anarchism and the 1950s for Marxism, to the point that I believed for most of my life that anarchism was created in the 70s during the punk movement, and Marxism was just everyone gets paid the same, and since the government is the one that redistributes all the wealth, it always becomes a totalitarian dictatorship. And I'm someone who goes out of my way to learn new and obscure facts, and believe me, the information at that time was very obscure. All they had to do was threaten to lose your job if you dared be heard talking about leftist thought or even tangential sympathies. Now they can easily search your old posts and find out who has Marxist sympathies or pro-Gazan sympathies and get you fired. They did it before and they can do it again, especially with this terrible Supreme Court. Accelerationism has never worked, or else there would be so many leftist nations that spontaneously generated from totalitarian dictatorships. To think that withholding your vote will push the Dems to do anything is just delusional. All it does is tell them that they can't win by leaning further left because you aren't a reliable block of voters. They need to move further right because those are the people who will actually show up to vote, and why Dems become neoliberal light. As for 24 years, from Nixon to Bush, the GOP controlled the nation, and for 2 of those elections, the Dems only won 1 state, and Jimmy Carter only won 4 states against Reagan. The only thing they learned from that is that they could never win unless they moved further right. Bill Clinton would have never ever swung neoliberal, or potentially even won, if the American left showed up, assuming they had that many in the way of numbers after the purge. Only by having leftists vote for them, especially in the primaries, will they even consider moving more left, because the right will always show up lockstep to vote, while the leftists can't be depended on to vote worth a crap, and they lose their jobs. In politics, it takes half as much effort to change someone's party affiliation than to turn a non-voter into a voter, especially if they have magical thinking that not voting sends some sort of message other than that politicians can never rely on you for your vote, so they aren't going to bother wasting their time and political power on you if it means they just get kicked out of office. It's literally natural selection for the worst people if the morally superior people don't bother to vote. Leftists don't vote because they feel like the Dems have some grudge or entitlement to their vote. Dems can literally lose their jobs if people don't vote for them. Therefore, they focus on cases of people who actually voted for them. This is a collective average opinions of their constituents minus the right-wing base. A leftist voting pushes the needle that much further to the left. However, if leftists don't vote, Democrats don't bother catering to them because it would be a complete waste of their time, and is not what the average of their constituents wants. Bernie and AOC are examples of places where leftists vote enough to make real change and push the needle left. If people in your area aren't left enough to push the needle, you need to convince them. If you just don't vote, all that does is let the powerful direct the nation, leading to the appearance of ratchet theory. The only way for politicians to pay attention to you is if they can rely on you as a voting bloc. Democrats can't do it because they don't feel like they have the political power to spend on a bloc that doesn't vote. If they do, they lose their jobs. Natural selection. Back to the title of the video. I've had leftists accuse this as being a threat from the Dems and holding America hostage. This is not a threat if the opposition is openly saying this out loud. Threats of what the enemy is openly promising to do is not what happened in Nazi Germany. Actually, Hitler's opposition argued the same thing and they turned out to be 100% correct. Leftists don't vote because the Dems don't move further left, because the leftists don't vote because the Dems don't move further left, because leftists don't vote because Dems don't move further left, because leftists don't vote, etc. You get the point. I've also gotten in the argument from leftists that you liberals want to have it both ways, that Democrats are weak and can't do anything, or the government is all-powerful. Pick one. The government can be very powerful if all the pieces are in place. Democrats cannot be powerful to change things unless they win by a huge landslide. If you don't understand how the puzzle pieces are required to fit together, right, which it clearly shows that you don't, then yeah, it seems like Dems are all lying. The last first term that the Republicans won the popular vote was in 1988. Every single state, no matter how small, has 2 senators, so a Wyoming resident has 62 times more voting power than a Californian, and 17% of American voters control half the Senate, which also has been plagued by the filibuster for decades, and we can't get enough Dem senators to change the rules, or else the GOP will actually be held accountable for their actions if they can pass what they want instead of blaming it on the Dems. This is assuming they don't actually do this in a power grab and then make it impossible to vote. Gerrymandering in Dem states have dropped by doing the right thing, while skyrocketing in red states. As I said, the Dems have to win by a landslide just to break even, while the GOP can easily lose badly and still break even. Until we change these laws by voting for Dems enough to let them change these laws so they stop getting their asses handed to them, even if they win, this anemia will keep going. The GOP can make the government very powerful even if they lose, especially since they just want to make the Supreme Court appointments that can shoot down anything the Dems try and cut regulations and tax the rich. Once the Supreme Court is in place, which we currently have full of religious zealots, anything Trump declares is now constitutional. The fire the GOP starts with each time they gain power continues to burn down, even while the Dems are in power thanks to the court appointments, and will continue to burn until we have enough votes to pack the court again. What leftists and many liberals fail to understand is that Gaza is just a side effect of Citizens United, as 100% of the GOP supports the IDF and 80% of Dems do. Unless we can get rid of that ruling, sadly only by giving Dems more overwhelming votes so they can overturn it because they hate spending half their time begging for money instead of actually making laws, this sort of thing is going to get worse and worse. We must have a strategy for 2026 to boot these people out on the down ticket levels in the primaries, who are the most susceptible to super PACs, to show them that they don't need IPAC to win. But until Citizens United is overturned, this won't happen. Trump is drooling at letting Bibi do to the West Bank what he did in Gaza, because he'll get great land deals, and just let Russia have Ukraine. 80% of the Dems owe their seats to IPAC, and thanks to Citizens United, they are blindly loyal to them, while nearly 100% of Republicans are more than happy to push for arms. This is purely because the GOP put Supreme Court justices in place because people didn't believe that voting did anything, and Citizens United made it so easy to buy politicians at levels never seen since the Gilded Age. Dems don't have a grudge or feel entitled to leftist votes, except for maybe liberal voters. The politicians don't even view them as constituents because they're an unreliable voting bloc, and usually too small a population to pay attention to. No one started taking non-religious people seriously until we passed 25%. Prior to that, we were ignored, and since there are still many people who fear non-religion, they just give us a passing mention, and the other party completely vilifies us. Last count, in 2018 or 2020, only 15% espoused leftism as a positive thing, while 52% had left phobia. It happened for the gays and it happened for the non-religious. You just have to keep spreading the message to get them to care about you and be a reliable voting bloc like they were, especially in the primaries where you can kick the neolibs to the curb. Just like how you can be against the concept of tipping, but still tip because the system is fucked, and you can do the same for representative democracy and work to build something from the ground up to replace it if that is what you believe in. You don't have anything to replace it, just America bad, so get to it. But in the meantime, the only way to fix this stupid systemic structure and not sent off to the camps or lose your job for just being on the left is to become a reliable voting bloc now in the system we have now. Also, be aware that leftist communities are full of right-wing plants telling you not to vote. Many have the ability to implant themselves as sleeper agents into a left-wing or liberal community, then activate around voting time when you can actually cause some change for at least self-preservation of your rights or the planet to spread your message without fear of prison or losing your jobs, and have some breathing room to build something to replace, such as building sustainable community and consensus democracy, like I explained how to do in the new Solarpunk USA channel, which I'm almost certain most people who listen to these plants and believe them aren't actually doing. But nope, they narrow your focus to real actual facts without any wider context, and make the world seem black and white, never mind that these injustices are a symptom of a much bigger systemic issue that is caused by people too apathetic to vote or too gullible not to realize they're being manipulated by the enemy so they can have fascism take over and send them off to camps, which they are drooling at. Marx always ranked liberal democracies over dictatorships or monarchies because at least there was some political recourse to counter it while building up for the proletariat revolution in the masses. Don't believe me? Look up what he said about Napoleon III, who took liberal France from a republic back to a dictatorship using democracy. If you live in a solid red or blue state and can't bring yourself to vote for the evil, yet sadly at this point necessary lesser of two evils, at least go out and vote for the down ticket races to show you are a reliable voting bloc, so they might actually start catering to you. But remember, when the turnout actually happens, Obama won freaking Indiana. The more Dems win, believe it or not, even though what you've been told about ratchet theory, the more many of them will see moving more left as a viable strategy, especially if the neolibs lose their jobs in the primaries like AOC was able to do. Not voting, protest voting, or third-party voting at this point, except for ranked choice voting states, won't fix this issue at all. Republicans will continue to win and everything will continue to get even worse. Only ranked choice voting, or another alternative voting style, will end this, which is on the ballot in 4 states this year. Until then, the only way to fix climate change will be to cause major systemic change with the terribly flawed system we currently have, like all scientists claim the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bills caused. You sure are showing the Dems by letting the GOP bake the planet in a sweltering, dying New Gilead. Man, you totally own them. Threat for what the enemy openly says they will do is not fear-mongering. Threats of what will happen if the enemy says and does what they say is the exact opposite of fear-mongering, and the GOP knows you're too dumb to show up, so they felt completely safe releasing Project 2025 and not suffer any consequences for it. We must vote this time and then have a real plan to vote out the genociders. If you ever studied the grueling, absolutely stupid and thankless work black activists in the South had to do for nearly a century with no feelings of hope after slavery just to get the right to vote, you wouldn't take this lightly at all. But since our schools utterly suck at teaching history and civics, you believe that everything they did was a waste of time since you aren't getting justice right now and you don't have the attention span to play any kind of long game, which fascists are experts at. And the disabled and the most vulnerable will feel the effects of first and the most.